Right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this special Edapt webinar where we're going to be talking about the upcoming teacher strikes. My name is Alistair Wood. I'm the Chief Executive of Edapt. We're going to get straight into it. We know time is precious, so let's go. If you've not heard about Edapt, who are we? I'll just give you a brief rundown. We were founded in 2011 by teachers who were looking to provide legal support and protection to members of the teaching profession, but to split that away from the political role of the union. So we're providing an alternative to the unions in terms of their legal support and protection and casework. So we can help you with allegations, disciplinaries, grievances, things like that. We only have professional caseworkers, two of whom you will meet today. Via our website, via this webinar. And our aim is always to be apolitical and independent. And that's really why we're putting on this webinar today. Obviously, the strikes which are upcoming are very political by their very nature. And it can be difficult to get some objective advice on that. And that's what we're trying to do this evening, to try and give you a little bit of the objective advice. We've already done this a little bit so far. There is some advice and guidance out there. And if you want to find that, if you just type in Edapt strike guidance, you'll be able to find this on here. There's lots of questions which we'll be going through tonight, but also that you'll find some things in more detail on that. Also there, it's a live document, which we do update regularly. So if you have any questions and things that you want that haven't been answered as part of that, do get in touch and we will try to answer those as much as possible. So on to tonight, what are we trying to do? And this is really, we've got one aim here today, and that is to give you clear, objective advice about the legal position around the upcoming strikes with the NEU. We're not going to go through the history of that, reasons why people are striking, etc., the dates. I expect you are well versed on all of those things already. I think the reason we're trying to do this is that a lot of the guidance that is out there at the moment, both from unions and from the DfE, comes with their own agenda. The DfE are trying to minimize disruption to the school system, and so their guidance has that kind of hint to it, whereas the unions, they're trying to drive support for their industrial action. So what we're trying to do is take a step back from that, have a look at the clear legal positions that are in play, inform you and let you know about the facts that are surrounding the legislation, so that you can then make your own personal choices around this. We're not, to be really, really clear, Edapt is apolitical, we're independent. We are not pro-strike, we are not anti-union, we are just here to provide clear, objective guidance. So that is what tonight is all about. So on to our panel. We're really fortunate tonight to be joined by two of our most senior caseworkers, Ruth Rule-Mullen and Joshua Burke, who should be coming onto screen shortly. They are qualified solicitors, so they really understand the law very well. They've got extensive experience in this area, both supporting schools and individuals. So I'm really glad to be welcoming them to this discussion. And, whilst I will try and help as much as I can, they are the experts. I'm happy to defer to them. So I'll just say a quick hello to Ruth and to Josh. Hello, good evening.
Hi, evening, Ali. It's good to be here, and I can see good few people have joined, so it'll be good to be able to get some of the questions out there that people have got at the moment.
Fantastic. Right, so let's crack on. This is what we're going to be looking at this evening. I know this is not going to cover everything, but we're going to try and get through the main points that I think people are concerned about, and it certainly reflects most of the inquiries that we've had throughout the last couple of weeks. So we're going to be looking at who can strike in terms of their legal position and their entitlement to strike. If you do choose to strike, what happens? What are the kind of outcomes of that as an individual? This idea about giving notice about your intentions, whether you're going to tell your employer whether you're striking or not, or whether you're not striking. What's the law say about that? Also about what can I be asked to do if I'm somebody who's not going to take part in the industrial action, what can I'd be expected to do in terms of my role, in terms of trying to keep things going within the school, and also look a little bit about the practicalities of what might happen on the strike day. We don't have a chat feature, but we do have an open Q&A. So if there are any questions you want to ask, please feel free to click on that and submit your questions. Andrew, our caseworker and subscriptions manager, is going to be sorting through those throughout the evening, and we'll come back to them at the end of the day. And if any of those we can't answer in the time that we've got this evening, we'll take those away, add to our guidance, and try and provide you with as much information as possible. So, right, I think here we go. Let's get straight into it. So the first question is all about who can strike. And we've had some stuff on the guidance about this. It's quite a interesting, I think, perspective and position about who is entitled to strike. Obviously, we've seen a bit of difference in the outcomes of the ballots from the NAS UWT and the NEU. There's been different outcomes in terms of meeting the thresholds, etc. And that does have an impact on who is legally allowed to strike. So Ruth, can I open the question up to you to start with? Can you take us through a little bit of who's legally allowed to strike at present?
Yeah, I think if I may, Ali, I'm going to pass this one to Josh, because this is one that Joshua's been working on, I think, with a lot of Edapt subscribers and general questions that have been raised. And if I take the next one, if that's okay.
Sure, no problem.
All right, so yeah, can't really take credit for the very useful diagram there. But in terms of breaking that down, principally those who can strike are any new members who are teachers. The ballot didn't mandate for support staff, so it is teachers unless you're in Wales on one of strike days that there is provision for support staff in Wales to strike. In terms of others, obviously, as an Edapt subscriber, if you are, you can strike. As you don't, if you're not in a union, you can also strike, and you do have the right to strike, and you do enjoy the protections for that. Obviously, those other unions, NAS, AHT, and ASL, as you can see on this slide, there, those obviously cannot strike because those unions didn't achieve the mandate. So that's just a quick breakdown of the slide on the screen there. But yeah, thanks to Ali for creating the helpful diagram, which I'm sure everyone will agree on.
Yeah, so I think, just to kind of like draw some summary to that, I think that the simple answer for if you're a teacher in England and Wales and you're part of the NEU, you can obviously absolutely join that industrial action. And that's anyone in areas 1, 4, 5, and 6 on that diagram. If you are not a member of the NEU, but are a member of another union, so that might be in area 2 or 7, you're not legally allowed to join this industrial action at present. That's the situation. However, if you are in area 3, could be an Edapt subscriber, you could not have any form of legal support, not something I think any of us would recommend, but you are entitled to join that industrial action as a non-union member. Things can change, obviously, between now and the 1st of February. If you want to join that action, you could join the National Education Union. As long as you do that before the 1st of February, that would entitle you to join the action. However, if you're a member of the NASUWT, or other unions, if you don't want to join the NEU but want to join the action, you would have to relinquish your union membership to become a non-union member. Whether you then join Edapt or something else, that's another option kind of available to you. But there are, it's really important that you're really clear about whether you can join the action or not, because that has a big impact on what your rights are as when it comes to the industrial action. So to just be really clear about where you stand on that. And if you've got any doubts, do get in touch either with your union or for Edapt subscribers, of course, you can come to us and ask further questions. Should we just pick apart some of the nuance that surrounds that around support staff? Because that's where it does get a little bit complicated. It's slightly different for Wales. It's slightly different for England. Shall we touch upon that?
Yeah, I think I'll take that one, Ali, if that's okay with you. I think the difficulty with coming to this is we obviously come to it with a bit of legal background and the detail, and the devil is in the detail in some of this stuff. So the basic position is that the support staff members of the NEU only got a mandate for strike action via the ballot in Wales and not in England. So it can be difficult if people are members of NEU to understand that that means that actually in the sense of being in England, it's only teachers that have that legal ballot for strike action and not the support staff in England. Position is different in Wales, as I said, but it's really important to make that distinction, because from a legal point of view, it is only the strike action that is indicated formally on the ballot notice that is lawfully protected strike action. So that means that potentially NEU members who don't have that mandate, or other unions who don't have that mandate, if their members were to support and take strike action, they won't have the same legal protections as those that are covered by the ballot. So people need to be very mindful of that and make sure that they're taking advice before they make those decisions. I think it's also important to just add to that, that the formal ballot notice will say what the parameters are of that strike action. So at the moment, what we know is that we have what we call discontinuous strike action, which is strike action on separate days over a period of time. What that doesn't necessarily allow people to do is take action short of strike action, which is doing other things to perhaps create difficulties in the workplace in support of the strike, because those are separate things. So it's being clear, if you are going to strike, what the mandate for that strike is, what are the specific parameters of that strike action, and what people can and can't do. And I think just being clear that if you aren't a member of NEU and you want to take strike action, you have to not be a member of another union that didn't get a mandate. So if you are a non-union member, which our Edapt subscribers will fall into that category, then you can take strike action and benefit from the protection, but you don't have to, and you don't get the support, if you will, of the NEU in the same way, because you're not a member of theirs. So presumably they're not going to be giving you advice and support in the same way.
Yeah, and just to touch upon that issue with support staff, Ruth, there was, I think there's been a bit of guidance around whether support staff in England can join that action and how that might be viewed by schools. But I think it's probably just quite useful just to set out that clear legal position and just to explain that, just so people are clear about where they stand with that.
Yeah, I've seen that the NEU guidance is out there, and people can obviously go and read that. But what people have to remember is that is guidance. The law is very clear in the Trade Union Labour Relations Consolidation Act. It's very clear about what is lawful strike action and what isn't. Anything else is effectively a bit of a grey area. So if people are in doubt, they should take their own advice. If they don't understand and they are an NEU member, obviously they should talk to NEU about that. But I think it's fair to say guidance appears to have slightly altered from the position last week, where they were talking more about NEU support staff members. There is a specific piece in that guidance now that says that they're not calling upon support staff to take strike action, which to me seems a reasonably clear indication that they understand that they're not strictly covered by the the lawfulness of that strike action. So I think if anybody is an NEU support member, then they need to be looking at that and thinking quite carefully about how they respond and what protections or not that they will have.
Okay, thanks for that. So obviously, as Edapt subscribers, if you are an Edapt subscriber, do feel free to get in touch if there are any things around this which you're unclear about. Let's move on to strike action then, and what happens if people do strike. There's obviously some quite significant outcomes of that. How that affects people's status, and there's also there's issues there around what kind of protections people have as a result of that. So I think what we're implying here when we're talking about this question here, what happens if I do strike from a legal position? I think, once you've established whether you can legally strike or not, whether you have a legal mandate to do that, what would be the outcomes there? So if you're in those areas that we just previously discussed, where it's possible to do it in a legal manner.
Okay, well, I think the slide's really useful here, Ali. I think it is a technical breach of contract. But what will normally happen is if you breach your contract, your employer will be entitled to say that they're not then upholding your contract going forward, and we would find ourselves in a situation of dismissal. There are protections on lawful strike action for people from being dismissed because they've taken strike action. So it's really important, going back to what we said before about the ballot notice, that you understand that what you are doing is actually lawful strike action. Because if it is unlawful strike action or unofficial strike action, so we talked before about taking other action that isn't mandated in the ballot, if it's unofficial strike action, it doesn't have the same protections. I suppose the key thing from people's point of view is that they will lose pay. And for teachers, it is 1/365th of pay. I think from the guidance that I've seen, it doesn't suggest that the NEU will be paying people to strike. So that's a question that comes up quite often. I'm going to lose pay. Will I receive pay from another source? The answer to that is no. Now, sometimes unions will have hardship funds that you can apply to as well. So I think if people are concerned about that, then I think you have to obviously speak to your union about that. But if you are an Edapt subscriber, then of course your pay will be deducted if you strike, and there will be no strike pay, so you will simply lose pay for the day. The other thing,
I was just going to say, Ruth, just to kind of give people an indicative about what does that look like for a teacher, and this is just an indicative amount. Check your own situation and your own details here. If you're a teacher who's on M3, say outside of London, each day of strike action would be about £87. So if you're going to do all 4 days of strike action, that would be about £348, if my maths is correct. That's how much your pay would be deducted. And there's issues there around when that pay would be deducted. We would think it would be likely to be in your next payroll, but it does depend on how that can be administered by the school. Because it's not always easy for schools to work out exactly who's been on strike, who's not been on strike, etc., and get all that done in time for that, the next immediate payroll. So just those things, I think, just to kind of bear in mind there. Should we move on to pensions briefly?
Yeah, thanks, Ali. Yeah, in terms of pensions, of course, it will have a pension impact, because if you're not being paid and you're not contractually entitled to be paid because you're breaching your contract because of the strike, then the same will apply to pensions. So you will effectively lose pension entitlement for the strike days, or the days which you are on strike. So again, it's kind of for you to think about how that affects you in real terms. There are sometimes exemptions for people who are on maternity and for anybody that's coming close to retirement. But again, seek clarification on that. If you're not sure, you'll need to speak to your school about that to see where you sit. And if you are a union member, obviously, or an Edapt subscriber, you can take advice from the people around you to support on that. And I suppose the last point on that slide is really about how this affects sort of early career teachers and students. And I suppose it's thinking about the impact that has on your learning and development. In simple terms, you may not be you won't be at school that day if you're striking, and therefore you won't be learning and developing. Equally, if you're not striking and your school closes, or your school has to adapt its function on the day, you might not get all the evidence base that you need on those days. That said, again, if you are striking, that shouldn't then subsequently have a significant impact. You can't be treated badly because you've been on strike as such. But what you might want to do is ask questions about how you will replace those days that you've lost, or you might want to think about whether or not you do want to strike as a result.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, well, got lots to get through, and I'm sure there'll be more questions which come off the back of that. Let's go on to the next bit. This is certainly an area where we've had lots of questions about giving notice about intentions to strike, whether you're going to strike or not. Do I have to tell my head teacher? Does my head teacher have a right to ask me? What can I refuse to answer? All of those sorts of questions. So I thought it would just be useful for us to touch upon that. I think, you know, if we talk just immediately about if I'm a member of the NEU and intend to strike, you absolutely don't have to give notice about your intention to strike. The NEU will do that on your behalf. I think and should have done so already. What that notice doesn't say is who are the members of the NEU. It will give them the school an idea of the numbers of members of the NEU within that institution, but it won't say who those individuals are. And so, you know, we know that some head teachers have been asking about staff about their intentions, and there's different views on this in terms of whether they should or shouldn't be doing that. There's no, I mean, from a legal perspective, they are entitled to ask, but I think it'd be useful if you could touch upon the legalities of what rights people have to answer that question or refuse to answer that question.
Yeah, I think the key thing here is, in terms of the legal position, you know, you have legal obligations under your contract of employment to your employer, and they have contractual obligations to you. You can't compel somebody to say that they are intending to strike, but nor can you compel a head teacher not to ask whether you intend to strike. It's perfectly legitimate for a head teacher to ask whether you intend to, because if you look at this from the bigger picture point of view at the moment, obviously there have to be plans put in place for the strike days. Now, that's very difficult to plan for that if you don't know precisely who is going on strike and in what areas of the school they work or their responsibilities are. Because to keep the school open, you would need to have sufficient staff. You would need to provide cover in the right areas. And Alistair's right. The issue here is that the NEU will have given notice because the formal ballot notice is legally required to give at least 14 days notice of the strike. And we've all seen the dates in the press, so we know that that's happened. What they then don't do is provide a list of who their members are. Now, there's various ways schools might know some of that information, but the easiest way to clarify what cover's needed is to ask. Now, there's different viewpoints on that, and I have to say there's different viewpoints from lots of people on the whole of the strike action. And I think, you know, the message that's coming across is that everybody's concerned about the children, but obviously this has got to be done for the children's longer term futures, I suppose, is the way it's being put across. And certainly that's the message that we're getting from teachers who are talking to us about this, that they are concerned for the children. And I think if that is of a concern to you, then there isn't significant harm in you giving that information to the head to say you are intending to strike. On the other hand, can completely understand that you might not be comfortable in doing that, and they can't force you to tell them, but they can ask you the question. So it's all about that planning and preparation. And I guess it depends where you sit on that, but the legal requirement is that there isn't a legal no, you can't tell them, or they can make you tell them. It's really a case of them asking and you deciding whether or not you want to tell them. So I think, you know, that is a personal choice. There's a value judgment there to be made, lots of factors to take into account. So I would just encourage people to think about that and how they want to deal with that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, the kind of simple answer is no, you don't have to tell, but there might be reasons why you might wish to, and those are for you as an individual to decide. And then there are perspectives within the union movement about that. There are perspectives within the government about that, and it's something which is very much a kind of personal decision. I think it's complicated somewhat by the issue being, you know, what some people will see the issue is with the government rather than my individual head teacher, and therefore I kind of don't want to, you know, make things more difficult for them. It's really complicated, and people just, it's about taking your own personal stance on that. From a legal perspective, you don't have to, and you know, you don't have to inform them, and then whether you choose to or not to, then that's up to you. But from a legal perspective, you certainly don't have to.
Alistair, can I just add to that as well?
Yeah.
I think it's just important for people to know that if a striking union is encouraging you not to share that information, they obviously have a reason to do that. What I would say to you is they also cannot discipline you for not doing what they recommend you should do. So if you do have your own view on the fact that you do want to help the school plan, and the NEU are saying you shouldn't do that, it doesn't mean you can't. So it's two sides of the same coin, but I just wanted to flag that as well.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, and on the kind of flip side of that, you've also got, you know, if a head teacher is harassing you to tell them, you know, constantly, and you've politely declined, you know, that also becomes an issue. So, you know, there's balance here on all of those things, but I think we've made that legal position quite clear. So thanks for that. Let's just touch on this briefly, because this can get very complicated. But in terms of, if you are not striking and you are coming into school, what can people be asked to do in terms of duties and their kind of contractual requirements in terms of keeping the school open or anything else?
Yeah, I think I'll start off on that and feel free to jump in. But with contractual requirements, obviously the clue's in the name, but it's going to depend on what is in your contract and the related job description and duties, which is obviously going to vary in terms of which setting you're in, which is, you know, why I think it's very key to take advice if you are specifically asked to do something and you're not sure about it. Again, like we said before, the benefit of an Edapt subscription is that you can get that advice. So I think it's very difficult to answer that question with a one-size-fits-all approach, because it will very much depend on your duties and of course what you're being asked to do.
Yeah, I think if I can just add to that as well, it also depends on the type of school that you work in as well, and what your specific terms and conditions are. Because if you are governed by the teachers' terms and conditions, there are specific rules about things that you can't cover unless it's reasonably foreseeable that you, if it was reasonably foreseeable, you can't be expected to cover certain things. So again, it's going to very much be a bespoke answer to that question, depending on who you are and what it is that you do, what your role in the school is, and also how the school's going to function on the day, because the schools don't have to run the curriculum on the day, so they can group class sizes and things like that. And they might ask in certain schools, particularly in academies, you can have teaching assistants and HLTAs covering classes where that might not apply in a maintained school. So it's really a bespoke question. So you can be asked to cover in certain circumstances. In other certain circumstances, you can't be expected to cover, but much will depend on communication and what the functions of the school are going to be on the day, whether your class is running or it isn't running. And one of the other things is about preparation in advance. Again, this is something where I think the unions are saying that you won't prepare lessons or cover in advance because it breaks the strike. On the other hand, again, you can be asked to do that. You can't be compelled to do it. But if you are not striking, you need to be cautious about breaching your contract because you won't necessarily have the same protections.
And to sort of just draw out the kind of the union perspective on people who aren't taking part in their industrial action, their perspective would argue that you shouldn't be asked to cover those those kind of duties and activities of their members who are taking industrial action. What's the kind of legal position on that? Is it because I'm using that word shouldn't quite carefully there?
Yes, and I think the guidance from the NEU that's coming out is that, and that they will challenge schools where that happens. The difficulty, of course, is it's where the legal protections sit. So whilst, and again, it's quite an emotive topic at the moment, and I think for the reasons that we talked about, the sensitivities, it needs to be remembered that head teachers also balloted for strike action and didn't get the required threshold. So one might be unsurprised to learn that, some or a lot of head teachers will have a lot of empathy with staff who are striking, but they still have functionality requirements that they have to fulfill. So, it's trying to navigate the landscape. There isn't a clear answer, because it very much depends on where you sit in all of this. But what I would say is, if you're in any doubt about what you're being asked to do, take advice, because it will be a different answer depending on terms and conditions, where you sit and what your responsibilities are, and whether or not you're part of the union that's taking action or not.
Okay, great, thanks. We'll just move on to our last bit and then we'll come to questions from our audience. We're coming to start to think about, as a week away now, the practicalities on the day. And I know this is something where there'll be a lot of anxiety on all sides of this argument and perspective about what actually happens on the day itself and how that's going to work out. And I think a big concern is in and around the picket line. This is certainly something we're going to provide some further guidance to come, because I don't think we'll be able to go into it in as much depth or nuances as we would probably like to be able to in this webinar this evening. So we will be providing some additional guidance on that. But do you want to just touch upon about some of the practicalities that people should be aware of on the day itself?
Yeah, so picketing is deemed to be a lawful activity as part of strike action, provided it's lawful picketing. So what that means is that it avoids any sort of criminal type behavior. So things like threats of violence and things shouldn't be happening on a picket line. There's also a requirement for picketing that it's in the legislation, a physical thing at the workplace. So you can't necessarily go and picket at somebody else's workplace. You have to be picketing there. The unions are required to provide a picket line supervisor, so that if there are any queries or anybody needs to check in with them about the safety of the provisions, and it has to all be done safely and lawfully. There shouldn't be threats to people trying to cross the picket line. It should be persuasion and no more than that. If those things are breached, then the union leaves themselves open to legal liability as a result of those breaches. But I think what's important from subscribers' point of view and individual union members' point of view is that if they take part in any activity which could be criminal activity, the police can be called, and the picket line may be deemed to have been unlawful picketing. But of course, you know, there are other consequences from that. If people are, you know, breaching the peace, if they are obstructing you know, highways and things like that, then other action can be taken against individuals as well. So it's just being mindful of that. And I suppose just touching on crossing the picket line, again, this is another area where it becomes a bit convoluted depending on whether or not you are a union member who has that ballot for strike action, and whether you form part of that picket line as a result, or whether you cross that picket line. If you aren't subject to the ballot for strike action, so let's say you're not an NEU member, or you're an NEU member but support staff only, then if you don't cross the picket line, you are not entitled to take that strike action because you're a support staff member. Then you're not technically striking. What you are doing is technically a breach of contract, and there's no legal definition on this, but effectively what all the guidance out there is suggesting is this is still a technical breach of contract, and you would be treated in the same way, in the sense that you will have your pay deducted if you refuse to cross the picket line. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the other legal protections flow about dismissal and those sorts of things. So it's about just being clear in your own mind. And what's the reason for not crossing the picket line? Is it because you don't feel it's safe? In which case, can you liaise with your school to assist you with that or give you any reassurance? Or is it perhaps a moral compass thing that you don't want to cross the picket line, or you don't want to be seen to cross the picket line? In which case, you might be able to talk to your school about that, or your union, or Edapt, if that's the case, just to kind of clarify your own position. But it's being clear that, again, there aren't necessarily those legal protections. There are for the people who are picketing, as long as it is a lawful picket. So if it is an unlawful picket, it's almost like all bets are off. Okay. It is complex, and no doubt people will have concerns as we approach the strike days. And obviously people will have to see how that goes on the strike days as well. But as Alice said, you know, further guidance will be available by then as well.
Yeah, and you know, and that's something we obviously want to go into the detail that people will want to know, so that it helps you to kind of remove those uncertainties and anxieties that might exist in and around that area from any perspective. So we will be bringing out some further guidance on that next week, certainly in time for the strikes. Finally, then, I think that just kind of I think we'll leave it there in terms of our kind of scheduled questions. I'm now going to open it up to Q&A. I'm going to bring in Andrew Lifford, our casework and subscriptions manager. Andrew, have you got any questions coming in from the audience there?
Yeah, we have a few, Ali. So one of the first ones which have come through is, I'm a part-time teacher, but I'm not in a union. Can I be asked to come in to teach on my day off?
If I take that one, then I think the situation there will be, again, it very much depends on your actual terms and conditions. If you are governed by standard teachers' terms and conditions, the rules on part-time workers are quite strict there, and you can only be called in on the days where you are required to have training that is planned in advance. So I think that would be a difficulty if you understand the teacher's terms. It will depend on your contract of employment. So if you are in an academy and your contract of employment is different, it's probably best to have a look at your contract of employment and what that says, because if it isn't standard teacher's terms, it might say something different about expecting you to come in on different days as required. So it's very important that you check terms and conditions on that and take advice.
Yeah, and I think again we're going down to that issue of being asked and being compelled, stroke expected. And again, it will very much depend on your individual contract. So again, you know, if you know, for example, if you are an Edapt subscriber, get in touch and we can look into that in particular. And likewise, if you're a member of any other union, do get in touch with your support services there.
Great.
Anything else, Andrew?
There's one final question here we've got. So someone said for taking the decision to strike, but do they have to strike on all the days, which we only have indicated, or but can they pick and choose which days they decide to strike? So for example, can they just decide to strike on Wednesday the 1st of February if they want to, or do they have to take part in all the days indicated?
No, they don't have to take part in all the days indicated. It is a personal choice. Just because any of you have got a mandate for strike action doesn't mean that people have to strike if they don't want to. It is a matter for them. And I can understand it from both points of view. So if they go through one day of strike action and they don't want to strike again, that's a matter for them. And they shouldn't be disciplined for their union by not following the, you know, all of the days of the strike action as well. I think some of the guidance is a little bit, I suppose, a little bit unclear on that there is an expectation from unions that people will comply with the strike action. But again, in the same way that schools can't compel you, your union can't compel you either. It is a matter of personal choice.
Okay, thanks for that, Ruth. And I think we'll probably have to wrap it up there. Just I'm very aware of time. We've already gone a bit over. You know, I used to be a teacher myself. You can't go over the end of your lesson. So we will let you get off as soon as you can. A few things, I'll just kind of make a couple of points. Any unanswered questions that have come in this evening, we'll take them away. We'll look at those. We'll make sure we answer them as we update the guidance so that we make sure you have all of that answered. Again, if you've got specific questions, if you're an Edapt subscriber, of course, come and get in touch with us. If you're a union member, do get in contact with your union as well. We'll continue to update the guidance as things progress. Like we said, we'll be bringing out some additional guidance on the strike day itself and the specifics there. And this webinar will post online as well, so you can share that around colleagues and other people who might be interested. If you do want to find out more about Edapt as an organisation, you can follow us on Twitter as our handle there, and also anything. We've got lots of advice and guidance on our website, edapt.org.uk, where you can find out more about us too. Any questions which have been submitted prior to this webinar as well, we'll make sure we pick up those in our guidance, because I know we've just run out of time tonight. And I think that's just a good indication of how complex the law is around this whole situation, and why it's really important to make sure you're getting quality advice around that. So thank you very much for joining us. I'll say a big thank you to Ruth and Josh and Andrew. Your advice, as ever, is really useful. And we look forward to speaking to you and seeing you soon. Thanks very much.